I think last night was worse than some. I mean, you got your local jobs, your piss heads, you got everything. Imagine being in the worst place possible, then triple it. I'm knackered constantly.
There isn't much peace when you sleep in a town centre, but there is the safety of CCTV cameras, Wesley says. It's a trade-off he's been making on and off for a few years now. He says since the breakdown of his marriage.
Everything just seems to crumble away, slowly but surely, everything fades away. It's just one of the things, it just happens, doesn't it?
Wesley's time on the streets has been punctuated by periods off them, but he returns. And new data released tonight reveals more people than ever before are doing the same, returning to homelessness. The last time Wes was given accommodation, it was cold, so he let a friend join him, a breach of the rules of his housing.
How long did that last for?
About 4 days, maybe a week, 4 days, I can't remember.
And before that?
Before that, I can't even remember before that. I try to switch off, really.
The desperation for a life off the streets is etched onto Wesley's face. He's just not capable of it, unsupported.
I mean, it's not fair. 100% to be able to feet.
Is that how you feel?
Yeah.
It would be easy to think that getting a roof over Wesley's head will somehow solve all of his problems. But this is a guy with complicated issues, almost institutionalised by the streets. And the truth of the matter is that keeping that roof over his head is every bit as difficult as getting it in the first place. He needs support services that are overstretched and in short supply, not just here, but all across the country.
So how long is the course that runs here?
It's about 3 months.
Okay.
Yeah.
Here they teach the odd building skill while rebuilding lives. This is the multi-skills hub run by the homeless charity St Mungo's. 15 students, most living in hostels, each learning a trade. Their goal? To break the cycle of homelessness. A simple sounding aim that's anything but simple. St Mungo's has been charting the 8,000 or so rough sleepers in London over the last few years and found the problem of returning to life on the streets is getting worse. Back in 2015, 879 people returned to rough sleeping. That number has risen steadily year on year, reaching over 1,100 this year. That's a rise of 27% in just 3 years.
So it's been quite tough, but then now I'm back in a kind of a uptrend, which is good.
And this is going to help on that uptrend?
It is definitely helping. It is actually a therapy for me, to be fair.
I've been homeless, sofa surfing, probably about 4 times since I was 18.
So you started here last week?
I started here last week, yeah.
Go on, and then what's the aim like? So you do this course, and then what does your life look like?
Well, basically, my aim is to become self-employed.
It's a system that seems to be working according to course tutor Steve, who used to be homeless himself.
So have you got lots of guys working in sites now that you know that have come through this course?
Yeah, quite a few.
How do you feel about that?
Oh, it's blinding, mate. It's absolutely blinding.
While downstairs they learn trades, upstairs they learn to cope with life again.
What I'd like to look at is knowing our rights.
And it's this full range of support, always on hand and judgment-free, that's needed not only to get people off the streets, but to keep them off, according to the charity.
You say, services are being cut, but the government hasn't got the money. They need to cut something somewhere. Doesn't it make sense for them to come out?
The thing is, if you don't spend the money there, you're going to spend it somewhere. So if people end up back on the streets, you spend it on the police, on the ambulance, on the emergency services, on people ending up back in prison because they're doing shoplifting or whatever. So you're going to spend the money, and actually it's a lot cheaper to keep people in their tenancy and support them to have a fulfilling life.
The problem has been heightened by a chronic shortage of social housing across the UK, say St Mungo's, which in turn means those coming off the streets are forced into the private market, where rents are expensive and housing benefits have been frozen since 2016. There is another problem, as Michael experienced. After a fixed period, landlords in England can issue a no-fault possession notice often moving current tenants out to hike rents. In desperate times, people resort to desperate measures.
I first started sleeping, I'd be in that corner, then as the weather started to change, I moved across to this wheelie bin.
This is home?
Yeah, this is home. There's my sleeping bag. So, come at night time, just to get my head down, it's a choice you make. Do you want to sleep in a shop doorway, being spat at, being kicked, or do you take the other option, jump in a wheelie bin?
The government says it's investing £1.2 billion to tackle all forms of homelessness with an aim to end rough sleeping. The new Homelessness Reduction Act, they say, requires councils to intervene sooner when people are at risk of being left with nowhere to go. And they say they're providing £19 million to help people at crisis point stay in their homes long term. Turning broken lives around takes huge amounts of support and even greater amounts of money. Some will question, can the nation really afford it? Others will question, can a civil society afford not to?
Paul McNamara reporting. Well, now, tomorrow, the government's going to commit £20 million to help up to 9,000 people secure their own home. Earlier, I spoke to Housing and Community Secretary James Brokenshire and began by asking him if £20 million was enough in the light of the cuts to council budgets and the complex needs of many who are homeless.
We have a broader £1.2 billion to support homelessness, the vast majority of which does go to local councils. But the point that you make over more complex need is one that I do hear. That's why, as part of the rough sleeping strategy, we asked the NHS to provide £30 million of funding over the next 5 years to focus on the needs that we know are there, on mental health, where a significant proportion of those out on the streets do have mental health issues. Equally, on issues of substance abuse as well.
We're talking about a really very, very serious crisis in which 449 people have died in the last year on the streets.
Certainly the numbers...
And 20 million doesn't sort of sound realistic.
And that's why I point to the £1.2 billion around homelessness more broadly, the rough sleeping strategy itself, around 100 million at its core, but more funding that sits around that. £30 million this year for local authorities in target areas, £45 million next year to local authorities in target areas. That's why it is part of a broader piece of work.
But to run a day centre for young homeless people, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, which itself will feed into housing, costs £1.5 million. I mean, 20 million just is nothing.
Well, 20 million should help around 9,000 people. That's what we estimate will benefit from this work. So it's not nothing. And therefore, it's how we do need to look at a range of different interventions, this being one of them. But I'm in no doubt the interventions that we put in place through the rough sleeping strategy, yes, over the next 2 years, we will need to do more.
But I'm just looking at the 41%. I'm looking at the 41% that local authorities have been cut by in the age of austerity. They're in no position to rise up and deal with this crisis. And £20 million is going to go very short distance to assist them.
Well, £20 million will support the 9,000 people. There are separate funding within the Rough Sleeping Initiative to support councils, and that sort of fits within this framework of the broader macro fund of over £1 billion that goes to the broader work that councils do around homelessness. But John, you know, the report that you sort of ran yesterday in relation to those who are dying on our streets is utterly shocking. And it does not reflect the modern Britain that I know that we need to be. That's why I think it is so important that we understand what has caused those deaths, actually having serious case reviews, which have not been done effectively beforehand, equally having better data and information, because whilst we have our annual count, that gives a very rough and ready assessment in relation to those that are out on the streets. That's why I'm determined that we will drive this in getting better information to then actually help more and be better targeted to make a difference.